Sustainability can often seem like a depressing catalog of doom and gloom. But although we face serious challenges, a better and more sustainable future is possible. Welcome to Sustainable Planet.
Welcome to this episode of Sustainable Planet. I'm political scientist Kimberly Weir, and my co-host is Jorden Dye, a guy who knows an awful lot about sustainability issues. Hi, Jorden.
Hi, Kimberly. Thanks for joining me today. So we've made it through the airport chaos. We're landed, and now it's time to actually enjoy the trip. But international vacations don't just carry emissions from the travel. What we do once we arrive matters just as much. From where we stay to what we bring and buy, we're diving into the on-the-ground choices that shape whether our travel dollars help or harm the places we visit today. So, Kimberly, once you've arrived at your destination, what do you think is the most underrated sustainability choice people can make while on vacation?
Well, since we'll be talking about what to take with us in this segment, I'd say that can have a big impact about how sustainable someone can be while they're traveling and at their destination. But if we're talking specifically about being in country, I'd say be as respectful as possible to the sites that people that, you visit. That's the same what we talked about in the domestic episode with the leave no trace. And that principle carries anywhere. To the respectful to the sites and the people, locals. That, and also opt for locally produced goods when possible, right? The sort of same thing we talked about with souvenirs in the domestic episode, that they make for better souvenirs. They support the local economy. And this might sound really strange, but also for local services, like it's better to pay the accommodation to do your laundry for you, to have, like, if you're in a developing country, especially, but this also applies to global north countries, to have your laundry done, because if you hand wash it yourself, you're going to invariably use more water. And so when possible, some people don't want to, like to give up their undergarments. Okay, so whatever. But, wearing, washing other clothes, it's a lot. You go through a lot more water than a wash cycle would. But especially in developing countries and rural areas, like they can use this money in the economy and they'll use less water. Your clothes will look better, no question. Like especially linens and cottons, and invariably they're probably likely to iron them as well. They're going to come out better looking. And then it gives you more time to enjoy your trip instead of worrying about basically doing house duties while you're traveling. So I would say that's one of the things I especially picked up while I was traveling.
Yeah, no, I really like that tip, because you almost think about it. It's one of those things where it sounds like, oh, I'm making somebody do my laundry, right? But like, as you pointed out, it's actually now being done in a big batch with a bunch of other people's laundry, as well as the fact that you're helping with that employment, right? Which I guess it gets to my thing I think about traveling is, I want to spend my money as far away from a chain or an international company. There's nothing really wrong with them in the sense that they're still employing. But like, when I think, it's going to sound silly, but just like at a basic economic principle, the closer to the kind of base of an economy you're spending the money, the longer that money will circulate in the economy and have a bigger impact. So that's like really what I'm driving for there, is that, eating at a small food stand, right? Over a Subway that's in every country now, right? Or while it's fun to try the McDonald's burger of the specific country you're in, it's better to go to a small restaurant. And honestly, one of my biggest travel tips is look for food stands and restaurants that have lineups of local people. You're going to get some of the best food you've ever had. You're not going to get sick from it typically, and that money is making a bigger impact.
Definitely. I mean, all that money that's repatriated back to the home, country headquarters of whatever franchise and so forth. That's definitely, and that's not to say that, there are locals who are employed at McDonald's, and McDonald's was always for the longest time, my go-to, that you knew they had clean bathrooms no matter where in the world you were. But no. I definitely agree with you. And I think it's really an important point is make sure people are lined up and they're locals, because that's and also just don't eat anywhere, because that's not a good tip either. If stuff looks like it's been sitting out for a long time, don't eat it. Just be careful with street food. But definitely, I think that's a good tip too. I think as we talked about, with international travel, in the first segment of this episode, in 2024, tourism accounted for about 10% of the global economy. So almost $11 trillion was going into the global GDP, like hundreds of millions of jobs. 1 out of every 10 job almost in the world is supported by the tourism industry. And so when we look at that on top of what international visitors are spending, almost $2 trillion, we're talking about like a big impact that people who are traveling have.
Yeah, and as we were saying, this is still a relatively small part of the global, like it's a large part of the global economy in terms of actual impact, but in terms of global population that's driving this or engaging in it, it's still relatively small and only projected to grow over the next century as more countries move into that middle income. So, like I think that we'll increasingly see it take up a larger share of the economy, but also increasingly drive more and more sustainability challenges.
And I think that, one of the things too that goes along with where are we staying, it's again, at the risk of repeating what we actually talked about, go back and listen to the domestic episode and you'll hear a lot of what we already talked about regarding the issues with hotels versus local places and so forth. And so moving beyond those and the vacation rentals and resorts and camping that we talked about in that segment of the big giant travel episodes that we're doing here, series on travel with Jorden and Kimberly. Since the sustainability issues are similar, we thought we'd actually focus on what are some of the other options. And in my mind, one of them is particularly European, right? When you think of hostels, do you not think of like backpacking through Europe?
Well, I have not actually done a European backpacking trip. So when I think of hostels, I think of China, which is where I used hostels throughout my China trip there, and ranging from, hostels that you wish you hadn't booked to nicer than some of the hotels that we were staying at.
Yeah, no question. And the thing is that hostels aren't just for youth. They're typically referred to as youth hostels, but that is not the case. There are plenty, like a huge amount of hostels that are actually, you just have the minimum age is 18 and they don't even allow children in. And so when I hosteled, there were plenty of adults, like older people who were there, couples who would, because it's a really cheap way to go, and families, if they did have family rooms and so forth. And it's like there's a site called Hostel World, a website. And it's like using Expedia because it's like the same sort of, you search, you get reviews, you can book hostels through them. That's very different in the days when I was doing this, when you had to send them letters or call them. Yeah, I'm old. And so many adults do use them. And like I said, some of them accept families and they have kitchens, which is great. So, if you're really trying to travel in a sustainable and inexpensive way, some of them have even private accommodation. So as an adult, maybe I don't want to be in a dorm with a whole bunch of other people, co-ed or even single sex. So it doesn't matter. And so as you mentioned, I've been in hostels where they were nicer than some hotels I've stayed in. And it's a great way if you're a solo traveler. As I mentioned in the last part of this episode that we did, that I take a lot of small group tours, but hostels are also a great way. Any city you can go to. I have met and traveled with a lot of people just for a day or a week or something who I met in hostels, and we just happen to be going the same way. And so they're really, I think, a great way to go.
No, I think they're a great option, and I think that they might not come top of mind because you have that kind of youth hostel dorm room, and like I've never enjoyed that, so I always went for private accommodations in it, and like minimum just need my own bathroom. That is my bare minimum, but I think that the social part is a really interesting one because like in these, we've done domestic and we're on really this a fourth kind of travel episode we're hitting at. And I think we've done a good job on the economic and the environment. And this is another aspect of the social though, right? Is actually like not traveling in an isolated bubble and trying to like keep almost your modern life static as you move through other places. And I think that like sometimes travel can be set up like that. And I'll never, if that's what you want and that's the trip that will make you happiest, do it. But I think you're also losing something, right? And there's a point of being connected with other travelers and meeting people from around the globe, but also being connected with the local community as you're doing it. I think hostels offer a great opportunity and an easy step into that.
Yeah, I mean, some people are turned off by the fact that there are like the hostels, part of the way that they operate is they have a lockout during the day. Unless you're like literally so sick that you can't move out of a bed, and they'll completely respect that. But they know people get travel sickness or whatever. But that you're locked out. But you shouldn't be sitting in the hostel anyway. And so you're kind of turned out on the streets to like force you to go and figure out what's out there. But that, and some have curfews, which is not so many, but some places do, in my experience. And like you might need to rent towels or sometimes rent linens or whatever. But I mean, isn't it as inexpensive as they are anyway? You're basically paying that when you stay in a hotel, just because you don't see that cost show up. And so one of the features that Hostel World actually includes is how sustainable a hostel is. And so I checked this out, of course, right? And I looked at Madrid, and all of them were level 1, except for one, which was called Generator Madrid. And that was a level 2. They rate 3+, and then they have a 3+. And I didn't see any that were 3. Yeah. I only saw one that was 2. And it was like a really nice basic hotel, is much more what it looked like to me. And it was $40 a night during high season.
Wow. Sorry, Kimberly, I just want to clarify. So is level 1 the lowest, level 3 the high? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I should have clarified that. Yeah. So level 2. So that means that they're doing more. They have a sustainability strategy in place and they're working towards certification. Nice. Level 1 basically means I took it sort of as, hey, we might not actually be doing anything, but this is something that Hostel World rates. So we're going to report to them like these 5 things or whatever. I don't even know that it's a qualification for Hostel World, but the fact that they put it on there and people see that and they know that there are people who do care about this, that that's something that hostels are going to consider.
And I mean, we see it across industries. Measurement is the first step towards even doing anything. And as much as like getting that first kind of rating just for measuring is even a greenwashing I don't like. It does though allow us to start to compare claims and to have a standardized, this is what we're looking for. I think in a world without even measuring this, it's easier for a hostel or any organization to bill itself as doing good. So it's great to see that that's something that you can kind of sort for now though.
I looked at London because there are loads of hostels in London and every single one of them was a level 1. I was surprised at that. There were 9 hostels in Helsinki, which is considered one of the sustainable destinations that we talked about last time. They were also all level 1. So I was surprised at that, but their level 1 might just be sort of like they're already operating at a higher standard anyway. And so for them, they weren't reporting the same sort of way that maybe Madrid is, which is a different situation.
But it might also be that like sustainability for hostels is still more of a luxury good, right? And not like because as much as I do think that you should look at hostels when you're traveling and you'll find some interesting options, I still think that they are more coded and sold towards younger travelers, where the priority might be more like how long do I have to sleep off the next morning and how much is the cost of the room, right?
That's right. Yeah, there were 2 in Oslo, and that was the only other one I looked at, and one of them was a level 2. So half of them in Oslo were a level, like one higher than the other. But I think just overall, for some of the other reasons that we've talked about, it's actually sort of a more sustainable way to go anyway. And so for people who haven't considered hosteling, and that's something that like I was younger when I was doing this a lot, and even then I hated being in the dorm, the whole dorm room thing. But I did it, and I'm here I am still. but if I'm doing that today, definitely private accommodation with an ensuite bathroom is like where I'm at. I hate it when I have to share, like hall toilets are just the worst, right?
Well, but I mean, it's something we haven't like a way to think about this, and why is it so much more sustainable, right? Like a hostel versus a small hotel even is one of the things to think about is the amount of space that's not being directly used for guests is a way to think about it. So in a hotel, you have a lot more space dedicated to just the running of the hotel, open guest spaces where they can spend, conference. All of that requires energy, right? To run, to heat, all of that. That's basically being like your impact from a stay at a hotel is the kind of intent, like the energy intensity and resource use of that hotel divided by its number of guests. So when you're talking about a hostel, which is already going to be a smaller building, probably less efficient efficient in a lot of ways, at least the ones that I have stayed in. But the other thing that is happening, so you have a lower footprint, but then it's because half of it is dorms. It's being divided out by a lot more people. So even you in your private room in that hostel is going to have a smaller impact than the majority of kind of just standard hotels.
Yeah, I think that too, that a lot of times costeling is combined within a country or intercontinental and local, metro passes or rail travel or something. And so that's like put that combination of things together and you've got the most sustainable way a person can travel, I think.
100%.
I think especially for the not eating out all the time also helps. If you're preparing some of your food, at least not all. And nobody should just, it's unfortunate if somebody has a diet or dietary requirement where they literally have to take and carry with them whatever they eat, because that's an amazing part of the tourism experience.
Yeah, traveling is, I get teased a lot by people who know me because I don't eat like entirely regularly or a lot. But Travel Jordan is all about the food and endless amounts.
So you're a foodie when on the road.
When on the road, yes, very much so.
Another thing that people might not consider is sleeper trains. And that's something that a lot, that's not uncommon for traveling within a big country that has a good train systems, can get anywhere. That to have like an overnight on a train for the types of tours that I do, I hate overnight sleeper trains because I wake up the next day and I still feel like because I have motion sickness, like for the whole day. I don't get motion sick on the train per se, but when I get off, I'm walking around, like moving back and forth the entire rest of the next day. And so, but I have taken them and I do take them. And there are some that are just amazing. Like you get on and off and it's like you're in a hotel room that's moving, and it's far more, after what we talked about with cruise ships last time, it is like way less of a carbon footprint, like sustainable, far more sustainable than taking a cruise.
Oh, 100%. This is even like thinking that the majority of trains that you're going to do for this type of travel are going to be a diesel engine. And that's like taking that into account. It's still far better than a cruise. I will say I've never taken a sleeper train vacation. It is on my dream list of vacations, though. So you had a couple really cool links here to check.
I wasn't even aware of some of these. The thing is that some people might not be aware that the Orient Express still exists, right? The Trans-Siberian Railroad still actually exists. But I came across two. Oh my gosh. I said to Jordan, like, you've got to check this out because how totally cool would this be? There's the Eastern and Oriental Express that goes across Southeast Asia, and it just looks amazing. And then there's one that's through India, say just India, because of how enormous India is. You could spend like an entire year and still not have seen everything there is to see in India. The Maharajas Express, both of those are like, wow, how amazing. And again, they have different accommodation levels, so they suit a variety of budgets and tastes. And so if you really need an ensuite bathroom, you can actually get this. How cool is that?
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I got stuck down a rabbit hole of just looking at pictures and forgot the sustainability for a second and was just like, I want to do this. I think part of the problem for me thinking about this is the only one we have in Canada is quite prohibitively expensive in terms of any other kind of cross-Canada vacation. So it just makes me sad. And which is why this has remained and very little European travel. So I haven't had a chance to really check out the trains there. But I think this is part of the reason why a lot of like more left-wing people in Canada and North America have just like serious train envy because the rest of the world does trains better.
Oh, for sure. Even in Africa, I've been on trains in Africa that are like put North American trains to shame. But it's also more sustainable, especially, because you've got the transportation and the accommodation combined together. You have the same staff, you've got the same resources that are being shared and so forth. But also it's a much more efficient way than taking a cruise, because you're not getting to and from ports where the cruise ship docks. And you're just you're on the train, you're there, and you might have to take a little bit of a whatever to get, but it's not going to be the same sort of resource intensive impact.
Yeah, no, I mean, it'll still have a little bit of the same kind of surge pressures we talked about in any of these, but going to be spread out. Set route happening more frequently, first of all, like when you're talking about train travel. So I think that kind of spreads the impact out on communities, allows it to be more of a steady state rather than, oh no, we have 100,000 people descending from this cruise for the next 3 hours and then they're gone. Like
on to Santorini.
Yeah, a different level. So while very, very much against cruises, and more so after that, I've been ruminating more on the first episode, and I just feel vindicated that I've never liked cruises. And
I said the same exact thing to my spouse, and as a friend of mine who loves to go on cruises always says, I'm getting off with 3,000 of my closest cruise friends, you know.
Yeah.
So you get off, and that's not really much of a local experience, I don't think.
No, not at all. And this is the other thing about trains, though. Like, it's such a different type of trip. Like, it's almost incomparable in some ways to it because like the cliche saying, right? The journey is more important than the destination. I think that really is the difference with train travel versus kind of if you're planning 3 cities and staying in hostels.
Well, I do think, though, that for people who do enjoy cruises, that's also the same mentality. Like the cruise itself is very much of the enjoyable part of the journey. And so people are okay. I mean, it's not ideal if you get stuck in port and you can't actually go and see the place where you've docked at. You bother to go to an island and then you don't even get to visit the island. But for people who really enjoy cruises, there are plenty of things on the cruise ship for them to do. And that's part of the reason why they like that.
Yeah, I mean, and this is, I think, the cool thing about doing an episode like this and trying to, we could have taken this to 10, 15 episodes and really narrowed down to each kind of type of travel and place, because there really is so many different types of vacations you can take. And I think that, like, at least for me, a goal of kind of talking through all of this has been start from, like, what kind of vacation do you want? And then thinking through this, how are we going to get there? What are we going to do while we're there? And how are we going to act? And you can tweak all of those to get the vacation you want and move it towards being a more sustainable journey. And then how far you want to go with that is going to be up to you. But this is really a great example of there's not one size fits all for any. We could probably sit here and come up with like a random generator that would come up with millions of different sustainable vacation options.
Yeah. And just even like, okay, so of course, some of it's going to have more of an impact than the other. The flight, if you're flying anywhere, it's going to have more of an impact than anything else. But there are other ways, like we talk about in our daily lives, that we make trade-offs. I love to travel, and that's not something I'm willing to give up. So in my daily life, I try to do other things that I can to try to reduce my overall impact on the planet and people in the world. And I think, another thing that I have actually done, which I quite enjoyed, is living locally experiences. And you get a home base basically. And, it's with everybody else who wants to have this home base, and they, like the company or the actual accommodation will basically set you up with maps and metro tickets, like every ticket you might need to get to wherever you're going, and maps. Nowadays it's on your phone, right? And even for hiking, they'll give you hiking routes, and then they provide you with the food, and or you can stay somewhere and it's like being in an apartment, but it's still having that same sort of support. So I did this in Italy. I actually did it twice in Italy. And it was like, I got to be in San Gimignano, and we were based out of there. And then we got to go to the neighboring places that were worth visiting. And we had an actual guide who was telling us all of the important things, but then we also got to go off on our own. And then the rest of it was like, you're just there and you can spend your time, there was a washer and dryer. You could do your laundry. You could go to the grocery store and make food, or you could go out to eat. And, they had some organized things, but they got us from point to point, and then you could come back at your leisure because you knew how to use the transit at that point. And so I think that was interesting, and not to mention the fact that then you're supporting local industries, you're supporting local people who are providing sometimes these accommodations that are their own houses that they're renting out. Or apartments that they have or whatever. And also you're having more interaction with locals, like just invariably because of this much more immersive experience. And so, those are things I would say, check those things out.
Well, but that's also, I just think that by taking that route, it's definitely, it's more work for you. But I find it to be more of an actual engaging. Like those are my favorite vacations have been the ones where, and I will say with this kind, I typically think a longer trip is going to be more conducive to it. But you feel like you got to see the country, not the sights. And I think
All my trips are longer trips, Jordan. So like
there, yeah,
I've never been a country ticker offer. Like,
yeah.
in fact, my students asked me at one point how many countries I had visited. I didn't even know. And so for me, it's just been about if I'm going somewhere, I want to see where I'm going. And there are
Yeah.
times I've been so close to the border of another country. And I'm like, well, okay, get on a bus and go across the border and just to say I've been there. But like, what's the point? For me, anyway, for some people it is the point, but for me it's not the point. So,
Well, and some of us can't take month-long vacation excursions still.
you're
So,
just you're in the wrong line of work. You got to go into, academia.
no, but I do think that it's something really special when you get to do that. When you get
Without question. No, absolutely so.
right? More than just like, oh, I went to the country, and not even just to check it off, but like I think that like, and I've done vacations like this where you're racing around for the 6 days you're there. You see every kind of site that you're supposed to see, and you get home and you feel more burnt out. You have some great memories, but they almost all like start blending together by the end of it. And I think that, in every sustainability issue we talk about, at some point we talk about being more intentional with your decisions. Wow, that word did not want to come today. And slowing down. And I think that it applies to every part of sustainability, and it can apply to travel just as easily. Like take a little more time to think about what you want out of the trip and how you're going to do it. And that'll lead to a better trip.
Over the years of traveling, and I know how fortunate I am, believe me, and I am grateful for that. And over the years, that has definitely been, initially I was much more of I'm, in this city or this place, I need to see these things. And now I'm much more of what are the main things I really want to see and how I want to spend my time? And if I come away and somebody says, oh, did you get to see such and such? And I say, no, like, oh my gosh, how could you possibly omit, that thing? Well, there are other things that were, to me personally, much more worth seeing. And I do think it's along the lines of what we said. It's much more intentional. You're taking your time. You're really, getting more out of it, and putting more into it for the people who you're around too.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me personally, this one, I always think of, so I was in China, as I mentioned, but I didn't see the Great Wall of China. And it was because of how travel worked. We really only had a night and then a day in Beijing. And it was the decision of, do we see a literal world wonder, but it is going to be the entire day, only thing we see? Or do we spend the day walking around from Tiananmen Square in the Forbidden City to the Temple of Heaven, 2 hours over to the biggest market in Beijing, and then just experiencing that? I mean, at one point on these wanderings, because we're walking through the city, I just smelt something and went down an alley, and I'm pretty sure I paid people who were cooking their lunch for part of their lunch. But it was the best bao buns I've ever had in my life. And my friend and I continued on walking. And so I always get that question, did you see the Great Wall? And then I have to tell people, no, I didn't. And you always get this look of like, you flew to China and you didn't see that. And then trying to explain to them that I would trade those like 12 hours of walking around the city over and over to go and stand in line and see something amazing. And I have no doubt that it would have been an iconic experience. But I wouldn't trade that for the world.
And not only that, but just the amount of time you just would have spent with other people like you on the bus or whatever to get the transit, to get there and back, just to say that you got to see. And that's it, though. But if that's your prerogative, then that's what you do. And so when we do travel, another thing about being intentional is what to take with us. And I don't remember exactly when. I just remember at one point, fuel prices shot up, and airlines started deciding they were going to actually charge people for the number of bags they had. And then they moved to that whole system of, well, you can carry on this one bag. Now it's like a nightmare trying to get on a plane with everybody trying to stow their baggage and fighting over baggage space and hitting you in the head with their suitcase as they're walking by and stuff. And so but at the same point, that actually was a good thing for sustainability because most people didn't want to pay extra to check a bag.
Well, no, and it's created this weird inversion where, 10 years ago when you were getting on a flight, you wanted to be the last person on, so you had the least amount of extra time sitting. And now I need to be in zone 1 or 2 because I don't know if my carry-on's going to get on by the end of this.
Right. That's the same for me too, is I when I come home from a place, I try to check as much as possible just to not have to lug it around with me. And then I can get literally be the last person on the plane. I'm quite happy to be the last person on the plane. But on the way there are certain things I want to make sure that go with me. And I don't want to have to worry about if they end up in, the baggage hold, even if it's just to bring it out at the end of that, whatever. If coming out of Cincinnati, there aren't a lot of direct locations we can get to. So a lot of times I necessarily have a connection.
Yep.
And so, yeah, you get on one of those tiny little planes and where you're checking your whatever you're carrying regardless. And so,
another thing on luggage I wanted to actually reference is this is an area where I think it's underrated, but spending a little extra money on good luggage is one of the very long-term decisions you can make that'll actually drive your overall impact. I think about some of the cheap stuff that was bought even when I was 18, 20, trying to get stuff together, and it's broken down. And my parents are still using the suitcases they had from the 80s.
Yeah, but I bet they weigh a ton though too. And that's the trade-off, right? Because you're giving what you can get something that's a lot heftier, but then you're coughing up those extra pounds for that. And so I am very hard on, but that's fair because I do a lot of wheeling with my suitcase. But, and I have backpacked and I can't stand trying to dig stuff out of the bottom of the backpack. But I'm done with that. I need a suitcase. And so I just get the ones that are recommended for the people who are airline, flight attendants and people who are, regularly do that because they do hold up a lot longer than that I have found.
Oh no,
and they're super lightweight too.
Well, and that's the thing. It's we're not saying you have to go find some luxury brand or something, right? It's just actually looking at what's going to last. I mean, there's two ways of looking at it. For me, it's always cost of the item divided by the amount of years I use it, right? Or number of times you use it. And that's really going to drive, especially most of the luggage nowadays is just made of plastic, right? So every time you're breaking that down and throwing that away, you're driving more garbage. And I think it's just one of those ones where the difference between that kind of recommended brand for airlines, and I'm thinking we've all seen, for me, it's WestJet, and I can literally picture them walking with their bags. It's not that much of a price difference than just buying something quick off Amazon.
Well, when I say that I'm hard on suitcase, I have only probably had two, the entire time since I've done a lot of international traveling. And so to me, that seems like a lot. But when if I broke down my cost per wear, I'm pretty sure I probably 1 cent, at this point for what I paid for it.
Yeah.
So toiletries, always a big one that end up being a discussion. For me, it's because there's so much travel size everything. And I am somebody who I still I fight with. I like to be able to dump stuff as I go. So I want to have smaller containers. I do buy things I can refill though. And so I don't necessarily dump containers as I go. That's something that I don't feel okay with, but they're super light, and they don't take up much space. And so that's cool. So, but when it comes to the stuff like toothpaste that you can't really refill, when I go to the dentist now and they offer me the tiny little flosses and, the tiny tube toothpaste, I refuse them at this point because I'm just it's not the best way. I will take some of the tiny toothpaste because I cannot not brush my teeth while in transit. And so it's hard to, with everything else you're hauling, it's hard to haul a whole tube of toothpaste and have to dig it out when you're in an airport bathroom or even worse, in the airplane bathroom. And so that I will but I try not to use those.
So that's one area where, because I fly a lot for work now, so I'm doing a lot more shorter trips. But actually last year at a point, I had realized I was through my third or fourth little mini toothpaste, and it was enough that I went to throw it out and it bothered me my brain kind of like clicked and was like, how many have you used? So I take the extra weight and I switched. I only buy like my standard house toothpaste now in 100 milliliters. So it can go in and it'll get through TSA. Because it's like those trade-offs, like you said, especially if you're going for like a month or 3 weeks, you have a lot of stuff you need to bring. And so you might not be able to do that. And I think it's, balancing out where you can, right?
Well, one of the things too is, and I actually generally, besides the ones that I have for the carry-on, the mini one, I do pack like regular standard size tube. And the good thing is too, is that's one thing, if you run out, you're going to find toothpaste no matter where you go. So a lot of times I think people have the mentality of, oh my gosh, let's face it, unless you're going to the outer reaches of Mongolia, chances are pretty good you're going to be able to find like toothpaste, deodorant, like sort of the basic stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing too, that like some of the favorite toothpaste I've ever had used are ones that like places I've been and I'll never be able to get again.
Yes.
I come home and I look for them like, no, I'm never getting that one again. But so that's kind of like a cool thing too, to try out something different as part of the travel experience.
I love going grocery shopping in other countries.
Me too.
The fun one for me is I was in China in 2013 and they were in the full swing of the charcoal craze, which didn't hit us till like 2018, 2019. So I had tried charcoal toothpaste back in 2013 and was like, this is horrible. Why is this a thing? And then watching as it became a thing here and some of my friends were getting excited about it, I'm like, please go buy it. Please try it. It is not a great experience.
Well, I just did a Substack post, a little push for me, about the difference between using charcoal and propane for grilling, because it's, grilling season.
Yeah.
And one of the things I came across with that is that now there's this whole thing with charcoal, like it's for detoxifying everything and whatever. And yeah, there's the legitimate use in hospitals for when people end up coming in with something in their system that needs to be quickly, ingested. But for all of those things that supposedly all these drinks are selling you, like, no way. I didn't include that in the Substack post, but I thought that was like, so to your point, like, how much is this charcoal toothpaste that it really doesn't taste great? And it's probably not, like it's abrasive on your teeth. So while it might be whitening, it's also kind of having an adverse effect. Like you really want to be doing that.
Yeah.
So, use your discretion when you do this.
But we got a good one here, and I agree. You have a note that it's worthy of its own bullet point. It really is, and I think that's sunscreen, separate from toiletries. I will own up that I have always been the worst for this. I was that kid whose mom would say, "Hey, remember to put sunscreen on," and I would look her dead in the eyes and lie and say, "Yes, mom, I did," and then run off to play in the water. But
and then lobster-colored Jordan would be back later that day.
You know what? When you were as pale of a Canadian as I am, you got to rock those 2 months of sun we get. So
yeah, the thing with this is it is so important when going to a beach that's connected to an ocean, especially, but this applies really for any water source, but especially because there is unquestionable extensive scientific research that finds that oxybenzone and octinoxate damage coral reefs and have adverse effects on sea turtles and other sea life. And it's basically every name brand sunscreen that anybody could name. Those are like the worst offenders. Now, some of them are making an attempt to change this because they have such a bad reputation now, starting to get that tied and associated with this. But I found that the state of Hawaii now, actually, when you arrive in Hawaii, Hawaiian Airlines gives out reef-safe sunscreen to passengers upon arrival, because in Hawaii, they actually have banned sunscreens that are not reef safe, and they won't sell them there. And they actually show an in-flight educational video about the issue. So they're really making it,
Wow.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, here you've got these islands, like they want to preserve that ecosystem that they've got. And other places are doing this. Australia is really big. I mean, the whole barrier reef is in jeopardy at this point. And so, when the last time I was going to that beach resort in Cancun, in Playa del Carmen, I was going to a place that was very sea turtle, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to do something here, hey! Like, I'm not just at home where I'm walking through the woods and I can sweat out banana boat and it's not going to hurt really anybody. And so I did some research and found that the Environmental Working Group actually has a searchable database to compare sunscreens and how eco-friendly they are, and also ones that they give recommendations too, so that you're not just ending up like covered in zinc oxide, and like this. So you don't really want that either. And these same places are moving more toward like trying to push for refillable containers and showers because ocean plastic is so bad. And so now I've seen more hotels that actually will have refillable containers in the showers, but I don't see very many refillable hand soap containers at sinks.
No.
In bathrooms, right? In hotel rooms or wherever the accommodation is. Even like we stayed at a vacation rental for a family trip recently, well, a few times, and every time they provide little individual hand wrapped soaps.
Yeah.
And so I always wonder, for my whole life, I was wondering, like, what happens to these little tiny bars of soaps that are completely usable? Like, what do they throw them away? And I remember when I was little, our church used to collect just everyday house soap. If you had the end of a bar, they would collect them all and melt them down and reuse them.
Oh.
And yeah, so I was always wonder if in developing countries, they just do this. So at least they can use wherever their accommodations or people take them home and use them. So what I started doing years ago was I actually will try to stick the soap back in I try to open the container, the package carefully. And then I take it and I carry it on with me until the soap is gone. Cause I just I love it when they are, especially when they're cardboard boxes, cause they're a lot easier to get back out again. But because you need to use soap, and I'm not going to be in a bathroom in a hotel and just using hand sanitizer. Cause that's just not going to fly. But that's one thing you can do, I think.
Yeah, no, and I think it's been really good to see as just a base level. Like we were talking about last time, hotels have a lot of incentive to take some of these actions from just their bottom line, right? So having the kind of on the wall refillable and reusable shampoos and body washes, that's a cost saving at the end of the day for the hotel as well.
No question, buying it in bulk for them, yeah.
Yeah, right. And then just refilling in the room. But that's a lot less plastic waste.
It's a lot. Also, it saves them on waste management too. So especially when you start talking about developing countries where they just don't necessarily have waste services. It's up to that property to take it upon themselves to dispose of that. They absolutely want to have the least waste possible. And I think that's, goes along with what you should leave behind and shouldn't take with you. I think what's just as important to consider that.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to jump in on the sunscreen for one quick sec before we move on. One fun fact for everybody, it's a $10 billion global industry annually. So just anytime you think something's small, it's probably $1 billion industry. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is because I think that impact on coral reefs from the actual sunscreen itself, I think this is a great nexus of kind of the travel problem. Is we've been talking about all these locations and a lot of them we want to go to because of their natural beauty. And at the same time, we've kind of focused on the impact you have on them while there, which can speed up their degradation. And throughout the whole conversation, there's also the kind of overarching climate change driving impacts on these locations. So, and I think the sunscreen and the impact on coral reefs is just kind of a great way to think about that for a second. Cause we have tourists racing to see these places before they disappear. And as they race to see them before they disappear, driving impact that's causing them to disappear quicker. And it's just the paradox of going to see remote and, beautiful locations.
It's the same with what we talked about with cruises and why Norway has instituted this policy that we discussed in the last episode of trying to preserve the fjords, because it's not just global climate change that's causing it, but it's the actual local emissions from the cruise ships and the small boats that are going through there. And so, yeah, that's kind of a good, also, we don't want to leave that behind. We don't want to leave sunscreen behind, right? We don't want to leave bad stuff behind that's going to degrade these areas. And I think too, just like what we were talking about with waste, it's a huge onus on especially developing countries, especially in rural areas, for them to have to dispose of waste. And so if you are in a rural area, it's actually better to, whenever possible, dispose of as little possible there and carry stuff with you to get rid of it where there is an urban system set up for waste disposal, instead of just putting that on the locals who, probably what's going to happen is they're going to end up burning it. And so that's, or else it's going to go into a landfill. And we've talked about those things before, how bad both of those are. And so I think that that's part of it too. And also, but this forces the decision between convenience and lightening the load as you go, like I was talking about with that tiny toothpaste, but, and other disposable products. And so that's something also to to consider. Doesn't really weigh that much more to take a full tube of toothpaste than it does to take multiple tiny tubes of toothpaste. And, so you have the tube with you when you go back, but it's not the end of the world, right? There are plenty of other things you will use and dispose of on your way. And so, and that goes for clothes too. I think, one of the things I always do still to this day, whenever I take a trip, is I pack and then I take more clothes out, because I know even to this point that I will pack like a few things too many that I'm probably not going to need. And actually, I'm to the point now where when I take a trip, there is almost nothing it's rare that I come home and not have worn what it had been in my suitcase.
I'm definitely the opposite. The people who travel with me, I'm definitely known as the person who's brought everything for every situation. Now I'm going to spin this, because I work in communications. I'm going to frame this as I like to travel and not have to buy extra useless stuff. So if I already have it at home, bringing that rain jacket just to have it, and this thing still stay within a carry-on. But I do think that is the balance to it, though, right? Because I think sometimes being like one of the things that a trip can drive is unnecessary consumption, where you're buying it just because you needed it for that 1 hour. I can think of the amount of umbrellas I know people have bought in rainy cities, especially Calgary. We don't get a lot of rain. Umbrellas not a thing you're thinking about, but so I think there is a balance.
That rain jacket is the one thing that oftentimes I pack and don't wear. Like that's literally maybe the only thing I don't use. And I am happy if I don't have to use that, right? So but it goes. That's one of those things. Absolutely. And it's about layers too. The more layering you can do, the better. And things that are also like multi-purpose. And so I have a thing that, doubles as a sarong. It doubles as a extra layer on a plane or a train or whatever. If I'm a bit chilly, it doubles as for women have to have your head or whatever, shoulders, whatever covered. Like I have something that, I can wrap around me that acts as a skirt, and then it covers my knees. And so those are the sorts of things, and then you can use it as a scarf if it gets chilly. So those are the sorts of things. The more of those that you can take, the better off you're going to be. And that extra luggage contributes to more carbon emissions. And that was why flights, they wanted to cut back, not because of that, because at the time people might have been sort of thinking about it, but they were thinking about, oh my gosh, that's more fuel, right? Yeah, fuel is so expensive. And they start giving us those fuel surcharges and how can we stop doing this? Because eventually we're going to get in trouble for it, which they did. And so how can we get around that? Well,
the irony
of bags of people. Sorry.
Well, no. Sorry. It's just the irony is that every flight I've been on in the last year, they've been begging people to now check luggage and pay almost like, we'll pay you $20 to check that bag, please.
Or else, please check it and we won't charge you for putting that in the towage. And with the whole incentive of, now you don't have to carry it around. You can be liberated from your luggage sort of thing. And so, I know.
Mean, if they could unload my bag in under an hour and a half, I might consider it.
So where are we, when we get there, what are we doing? We talked a lot about in the last episode about amusement parks and cities and sightseeing and so forth. But I was thinking more kind of along the lines of going from country to country or island hopping and how we get to these places and the impact that has. As we were talking about, if you're in China, is it really worth the trip just to say you got to walk on the Great Wall of China for 20 minutes and then spent the rest of the time in transit, then the amazing immersive experience that you had walking around the city and maybe taking public transportation. And that's the same with people who are country collectors. And I know I sound like, okay, I hate cruises and I hate country collectors. And okay, maybe I do. So, all right, my bias is out there and I admit it. Overland tours. I mean, that's a thing where you go and you basically are hitting as many countries as you possibly can on that tour. They're better if you're doing it with groups. You're better if it's using public transportation. It's better if you're not flying from destination to destination. It's better if you're taking it. There are ways you can also go about that too. So if that's your objective and that's the way you like to, live your life, then at least there are sustainable ways you can go about doing that.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd mention too, though, that is from us in North America going to basically any kind of international destination, you've got a lot of upfront kilometers to get there. So I do think that, again, if you're being intentional about it, to your point, if you're just flying country to country to country, doing a day here and then a flight, that's going to rapidly drive up your kind of your impact from that trip. Now, if you're thinking about, you've already made the flight to London, right? And if you can add 5 days in France and take the channel across, or right, that you're now actually taking that initial cost of environmental impact to get there and spreading it out a little bit. So I think that, again, to your real point here is that if you're just doing it to get the checkbox, it's probably not going to work out well. If you were, spending some time and thinking about it intentionally, you can actually find a way to kind of reduce your overall impact while increasing it slightly.
But that's almost like combining errands, right? I mean, in your daily life, because you really want to see Paris, or you really want to cross over and spend the day and like on the coast, whatever, in France, and you're already in the UK. So, okay. Or you want to go to Ireland and you just hop on the ferry. You can go from Holyhead to Dunleary and back and forth in a few days and have a great trip. And so I think that sort of along those lines. But if you're just flying from destination to destination, I think that's and think about it too, just in a sustainable way for your own personal existence, because how many hours are you racking up at an airport, right? Yeah. You have to get there 2 hours ahead of time, however long it takes you to get there from where you're staying. Then you arrive and you've got to go through sometimes immigration and customs. And if you've checked bags, and then you have to get from the airport to where you are. And then you're losing a lot of that time when you could have been doing something much more interesting, somewhere else, perhaps. I think another thing is remote locations. That's something that, yes, there are amazing, phenomenal cultural, wildlife, photography, trekking, adventure, you name it, sort of things. And again, there's such a huge impact on those at the front end. I want to go to Rapa Nui to see Easter Islands, like the statues. But every time I look at it, I just cringe and go, oh my gosh, because it's so far out of the way. And every time I read about it, they're just having more and more problems with plastic and just like water and all sorts of things. And do I really want to, as much as I'd like to see that? And now it's just so overrun with tourists. What sort of experience is it going to be? Maybe there are some other places where I could also have amazing experiences. And maybe that's a place I'll never get to. And that's a bummer, but.
Yeah, I really think of these as a paradoxical kind of problem, is that you think you're going to this really remote, natural place, so it should be great, right? And it's going to be completely natural. And then I think of, I know a great sustainability focused company here in Canada that does tours, but because of where their location is, it's fly-in helicopter tour. So for the 3 to max 4 people who can go to this, and once you're there, it is entirely a sustainable operation, and the owners have done, I mean, platinum level job making sure. But as we were working on a project with them when we went through it, there's just no way to erase the fuel cost of flying 4 people on a helicopter into a remote location, right?
Well, at least they're doing the best they can, considering that people will be doing this, and people will do it, even especially, plenty of people will do it in a not sustainable way. So at least they're making that effort.
100%, which is where we kind of pointed to, right? You're going to have an impact from this. Don't think that you're bad because there's fuel up front. That's better than being horrible on every other step afterwards.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But then to your point, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's the same thing we talked about with airlines and sustainable fuel. There are other things airlines can do too if they're not at the sustainable fuel point yet. And that's the same with these remote locations. As we talked about with Mount Everest, everybody just wanted to queue up to go to Everest. That's not a remote location anymore.
No, not at all. And that's to your point, they kind of rapidly fill up. And I made the point last one on the domestic with kind of the influencer posts, right? And suddenly that remote location that's now been geotagged has 1,000 people at it within the next week.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I have to say another one of those things that shopping tours. I have been around people who are in destinations just to shop. They are there. Morocco is a destination. That's one of those places sold as a shopping tours for the destination. And so all I can say is ugh when it comes to that.
Yeah.
But again, there are people who, because we do not want to pass judgment. We just want to educate people, and we want to, if people are listening listening in the first place, then you obviously either were tortured to listen to this or care a little bit about sustainability. And so there are, like everything else, there are ways you're going to eat meat, fine, eat meat, but maybe give up meat on Monday, or don't waste as much food, or whatever. There are lots of trade-offs that we can make if that's like what your dying urge is.
Yeah, and I mean, like as I said on the last one, I'm bad for my grandmother instilled gift, the gift shop gene in me. But I think there's like fun ways that if shopping is the thing you love, okay, like I almost would want to be like, okay, let's take that on as the challenge. Okay, so fine, you want to have a shopping tour? Well, then can you only buy things that were made or produced within a certain range of it? Let's set that as a goal. Like, let's make it fun too, right? Like, and not just a kind of, I don't know. For me, you shouldn't buy anything on vacation you can buy at home. Like, I mean, the same good, not like a book. Again, anybody tells you not to buy a book is going to get into a problem. I just don't think that you should be buying, like the t-shirt that you can buy at home, I guess is where I'm going with that. And there's lots of ways that, again, you can buy amazing things, spend money locally and drive a great impact.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is that it is, that, putting into the local economy, especially I've been with people who were on sustainable based tours and still spent heaps of money. And they're like, oh, but I'm supporting the locals. Okay. And that's great. But then I found out this one woman had an entire room in her house that's all it was stuff they had bought on tours. And it was just sitting in this room, so that's not really sustainable either. So no. As far as things go, then, are you feeling hopeful about this?
So, I think I'll build off of what we said last time, right? When we ended the first part of this episode, I said I was hopeful because it's an area where there's lots of options, and a little intentionality can go a long way to start even taking off some of that top level impact. Where I'm less hopeful is that it's one of those areas where it's almost entirely on the individual. As I think I've made clear on the show, I think that when you can make a system change, that'll just kind of changes everybody's behavior naturally. That's going to be the easiest and most impactful. This one, I'm less hopeful because it really relies on everybody being really intentional. And I'll just say from personal experience, I make a spreadsheet for every vacation I do and plan out the days, and I get really into it. And people's reactions to that makes me think that they're not going to be intentionally spending a lot of time planning.
Okay, we would get along really well because I do the exact same thing. Everybody asks why my spouse doesn't like to travel when I literally plan everything. All I have to do is pack a suitcase, like why don't you just buy him a ticket and just, say, oh, we're leaving. I love him too much. I'm not going to do that.
I love him too much to just buy the ticket.
I was gonna say, right? But yeah, I'm with you. And I think what the state of Hawaii has done with the sunscreen and the country of Australia, moving in that direction, like you said, it's built in. And there are some resorts that just refuse, you cannot use, if you have that sunscreen, then you are banned from using it. We will collect it, whatever they do. But so much of what we've discussed today is really up to the individual. And so, hopefully, if nothing else, people who do care a bit we've given you something to think about, and consider moving forward.
Well, I mean, maybe just to tack onto that, Kimberly, this is an area where we've driven a large part of 10% of the global economy is driven by 10% of the population. This is an area where small numbers of people shifting their money is actually pretty big considering the numbers of people we're talking about. So maybe that's the kind of hopeful spin I would add, is that it is an area where it is on us as the individuals, but we can have an outsized impact by driving that.
Yeah, because of that, there are some of these same people who are doing these same things. And so it is more likely that you or I have more of an impact with what we're doing and the more changes that we can make than just say, in a lot of other areas that we talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you enjoyed our episode of Sustainable Planet, or even if you didn't, let us know at splanetpod@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You'll find these links in our show notes, along with additional resources from today's show, including my Substack post, and on our website at splanetpod.com. If you have time, we'd really appreciate if you rate and review us. Tell your friends and family and anybody who will listen to you to listen to us, because that would also be awesome. Spread the word. Thanks for listening. Have a sustainable trip and a sustainable day.